Hello and welcome to the Forest of the Fae. Here on Pop Culture Fae, we take a look at movies, TV, comics, and other popular media through the lens of the queer folks of society. I am Miller C. Lashbrook, and I am your host on your journey through the Forest of the Fae. This week on Pop Culture Fae, I am celebrating 1 year of Pop Culture Fae, and I will be talking with author and psychotherapist Ben Stimpson to discuss fandom and psychology and how those two things overlap. I hope you enjoy. This is Fae News. In this segment, I'll cover this week's big entertainment news that caught my eye. And this week in movie news, Transformers Rise of the Beasts came out. Now, I was originally going to do a full review for this movie, but after seeing it, I don't really have all too much to say about the movie. Now, I am going to give my thoughts a little bit right here, though. That is not to say that this movie isn't good, because I did very much enjoy it. I personally think it is the best full Transformers movie that has been made. So I will say that. So obviously you have the Michael Bay movies, and then we had Bumblebee. I think Bumblebee was very small scale, very character focused, and I love that movie for what it is, but it definitely was missing the scale and epicness that you get from the Michael Bay movies. And I think this Transformers movie, it has a good mix of that. The Transformers are treated like actual characters and not just plot devices. Uh, the human characters have a reason to be there in the plot. The focus is on something Transformer related, not human related. I think this movie just works really well. It reminds me of if they took like an a 2 or 3 episode arc of one of the animated shows and they turned it into a live action movie. And for me, as a fan of the animated shows, someone who grew up watching old VHS tapes of the 80s animated series, I'd rent them from Blockbuster. Someone who grew up watching the imported anime shows like Transformers Armada on TV. This is the Transformers movie for me. Now, that's not to say it's perfect. I think there's still places where it has a little bit more room to grow. I think the character dynamics could have been worked on just a little bit. I think some of the action stuff could have been filmed in a little bit more exciting way, but overall I really enjoyed this movie, and I really hope that we just can kind of continue from here and see where the franchise goes. We don't need to have the Michael Bay movies be canon. Like, just throw that all away, keep going from here, stick close to the Generation 1 designs for the Cybertronians, and just let this franchise be fun and exciting and playful and colorful. And I think a lot of people will come back to this franchise who have left it. In other news, Avatar: The Way of Water is now streaming on Disney Plus. Other than that, Summer Game Fest is going on, so we're getting a lot of trailers and information about different games coming out, but not too much news going on. I mean, the Writers Guild is still on strike, and it looks like SAG-AFTRA might also strike as well, and so we'll see how this all develops. But it definitely, hopefully, not definitely, hopefully, the studios come to their senses and reach an agreement with the Writers Guild of America soon. But yeah, that concludes all of the Fae news for today. Next up, you're going to hear an interview that I had with author and psychotherapist Ben Stimpson. We're going to talk about how fandom and psychology kind of overlap with one another, how archetypes can be used from fandoms to help clients in psychology, or just help people in general to kind of understand their own psychology. So I thought this was an interesting conversation, and thought that you all might like it and find it interesting. So I hope you enjoy that. So yeah, go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience.
Of course.
Who you are, what you do, what your pronouns are, and
Of
all of
course.
that.
So my name is Ben Stimpson. I go by he, they, them pronouns. I identify as non-binary, and that's really a recent thing for me. I'm a therapist, a counseling therapist in my professional life. I'm also an author. I have a book coming out in September, kind of unrelated to what we're talking about today. And I also am a cat dad. So you might hear my cat kind of in the background here. So yeah, it's weird. I don't even know who I am half the time. I'm a spiritual practitioner. Spirituality is really big for me. And I find that a lot of that spirituality piece and my psychotherapy piece and my fandom nerdom piece comes in. I used to be a LARPer too. Used to be. I don't get out very as often as I want to. And so I think I've got street cred when it comes to this.
What do you think? Was it COVID that kind of put a dip in your LARPing, or just time commitment? What made you kind of do LARPing a little less?
Of course. So I actually stopped LARPing a few years before the pandemic. I just got really busy. So when I was LARPing, I was about in my late 20s, and I had never really done it before. So like I had a chance to go and do like Vampire the Masquerade when I was much younger, and never had the opportunity because I was living in the middle of nowhere. And so I started LARPing when I actually got a car, and for about a year I LARPed. But then I got busy with school and this and that and all the others. So I stopped LARPing about 2015. But it was cool because it kind of transitioned into some of the other things, big things in my life too. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I went to my first time as an adult going to a Renaissance fair, actually back in early November, and with some friends and with my husband, and we all dressed up and like put on characters and everything, because we all played Dungeons and Dragons together, but we had never done like LARPing and like or anything, and it was just so much fun.
Yeah.
Just like so freeing, just like
Mhm.
kind of being silly and putting on a character.
It's amazing. I'd never done anything like it before. And you know, I was because I have a learning disability, so like D&D and any kind of role top playing games were always prohibitive for me because I don't do numbers very well. So when it comes to like stats and things, role playing and things like that, I love role playing and storytelling and story building and like lore. But when it comes to actually doing the stats part, it was horrible. I had no idea what was happening, and so I was often dying very quickly. So
When did you realize that you were uh, a pop culture enthusiast or a nerd in some kind of way?
yeah, for sure, definitely. Well, actually, I was very young when I started to realize that. I always loved. So I'm originally from the United Kingdom. I came over to North America to Canada when I was 8 years old, and I'm 36. So around that time, there was Babylon 5 was on television. I had grown up with Doctor Who, the classic Doctor Who. That was a huge thing on BBC back then, and also Star Trek. So I always kind of loved sci-fi. I grew up on Star Wars. I grew up on King Arthur and all like mythological stuff. So
Awesome.
really, yeah, really, I was very, very young. Like I remember coming home from school when I was 6 years old, in 1994, and going and watching a new episode of Babylon 5. That was a huge thing for me. And of course, I didn't understand most of what was going on, but it was kind of it just kind of evolved with me. And I remember when we moved over to Canada, I asked my mom, oh, do you think they'll have Babylon 5 over there? And my mom like smirked and she said, oh, I'm sure they will. So yeah.
Yeah, so you're about 10 years older than me. I've only seen New Who, so I've never gone back and watched the classic Doctor Who. It's on my list of things to go back and do at some point, in addition to listening to like the audio dramas and stuff
So good.
for Doctor Who. Um, but yeah, the so you're like sci-fi into kind of fantasy kind of got you into fandom. You use fandom in
Mhm.
your practice as
Yeah.
a therapist. Yes. Can you talk a little bit about that and what that kind of looks like?
Absolutely. So in a way, actually, LARPing was kind of part of the key to opening and unlocking this for me. So when I was LARPing, a lot of the people I was LARPing with, there was a game that was going on, and it was about, I'd say we probably had about 40 people each game. So it was a mid-sized LARP. It wasn't huge, but a lot of them were 10 years younger than me. So I noticed the way and the relationships that these younger players had with their characters. And we like it was a very traditional North American LARP. Very you go, you're in character all the time. A lot of them played Nordic style, which is absolute
Mhm.
immersion. There is no coming out of your character whatsoever, or you're kicked out of the game. So it was a very intense process. And so going to those games and getting to know kind of the backgrounds of these characters, and seeing the development of some of these players outside of those games, I could see that the relationship with these characters were proxies for themselves.
Yeah,
And
they
that was
might have
very interesting.
been like
Sorry.
exploring some aspect of themselves that they maybe didn't feel comfortable with, or like it was a heightened version of who they are in their everyday life.
Well, it's a process. So what I've seen, and I think my profession is now starting to catch on to this. We're starting to see a lot more research into this. So kind of the way that people evolve their characters, the characters that they first come up with tend to be themselves. They can tend to be
Mhm.
just heightened versions of themselves. And then as they start to become more accustomed to creating characters, they feel more comfortable in their games, because it's a social venue as well as it is a gaming venue. So as they become more comfortable, they start to become interested in playing with character. They become interested in playing with personality, and so they may start to choose to take on characters that are very different from themselves as a way of playing, right? Playing with identity, playing with kind of who the possibilities of who they could become, right? Now, I know your background is in musical theater, right?
Yeah, I was a theater kid in high school.
Yeah.
I assistant direct at my school where I work for our theater program. And so yeah, that idea of play and how it can just unlock so much of a person and the potential. I see it in students all the time who will go from the freshman year being like they don't talk to anybody, they're very like closed off from the world, and then by their senior year they're like becoming whole other people and really blossoming in who they are because they've been able to become someone else on stage.
They've been able to explore. They've been able to
Mhm.
push back against those constricting boundaries that society is placing on them. I mean, there's a very good reason why queer kids tend to be either music theater kids, or LARPers, or nerd, or fandom. Fandom is a place that they can go to be comfortable in exploring different possibilities, right?
Oh,
Especially, I think,
definitely.
especially for those who are neurodivergent, we're starting to see a lot of connection between, say, neurodivergency, trans identity or gender expression, sexuality, and fandom. There's a lot of work going on in exploring those connections. So that's really kind of how I started to put the pieces together and explore. Around that same time, I was also involved in a spirituality group that was working with Joseph Campbell's monomyth, which for
Oh,
many
I
people in
love
fandom,
Campbell.
he's amazing, right? So
Yeah.
so it was interesting to kind of go from like a lived paracosm, this idea of like a shared kind of created universe, into again a different type of paracosm where people were exploring themselves, but not so much in dressing up to be elves and whatnot, but exploring themselves in a different way, in a mythic way. So then when I started to study psychotherapy, those two experiences really came up, and it's just kind of continued ever since.
That's really cool. Yeah, I want you're like naming all these like things that kind of have popped up for me recently too. Um, it's really interesting. Um, I I think it was about a month ago now. I discovered the podcast. They're called What the Force. And
Mm.
so they take like Jungian psychology and
Mhm.
like Joseph Campbell's ideas of the monomyth and apply it to Star Wars.
Love it.
Uh,
Love it.
and I really kind of like I went through some of their back catalog, listened to some old episodes, and it just really got me kind of thinking on about my writing as a writer that
Mm.
I do, and how the monomyth could be applied to that. And it
Mhm.
led me to this kind of interesting question of, wait, most of my stuff is non-binary characters or female characters as my like leads in what I
Interesting.
write. And I was I through a Wikipedia rabbit hole. That's how it always is, right? Uh, I discovered that some authors have tried to create the heroine's journey
Yes,
as kind of a counterpoint to Campbell's hero's journey, and it's
absolutely.
been kind of interesting looking into how gender has an impact on the monomyth and the idea of the journey for a character. Have you like touched on any of that in your research and in your studies?
Absolutely. So actually, one of the main people I trained with, her spiritual background is in women's mysteries, particularly Avalonian tradition, and
Mm,
so her whole work, most of the people she works with are women, and or female identified, and that idea of the heroine's journey. You know, a lot of the heroines in the monomyth. Or a lot of the female characters in monomyth tend to be ones at home, but even when they're at home and the hero is off doing his adventure, they're having their own adventure too. It's a different sort of understanding. So you know, people like Pinkola Aesps or um, of course, all the names don't come up now. Of course, the women who run with wolves, right?
mm,
A lot of individuals and psychologists are looking at this gendered version, and now we're starting to see also the queer lens coming in. So a lot of queer theory is coming into the
mm.
idea of the monomyth and the idea of queering the monomyth and looking outside those bounds. So it's very, very interesting. What I love is that regardless of kind of where you find yourself in that sphere, it's about exploring self, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
As like I gender fluid, non-binary. It's kind of where I am at gender wise, and I'm queer and a nerd, and so like this idea that there's this one story, one trajectory that heroes go on, and then finding another one, I was like, wait, there's all these other archetypes and like applying mythic archetypes to modern day storytelling. It's just been something that I love. Um, I took like a King Arthur class in college as a literature class because I was just like I needed to get my hands on all the folklore, legends, and fairy tales and myths that I could. Um, the the I don't know, maybe I studied classics in another life, in a previous life.
Maybe.
Uh, so are there any particular fandoms that you think like you can just tell from watching it or looking at it that the creators had uh these larger than life kind of mythic ideas in mind when creating it. Obviously, Star Wars comes to mind to me. Are there others that you have that you really like to use in your work with your
Totally.
clients?
Totally. No, absolutely. And well, I mean, we've talked about what I'm going to talk about today, so
Yeah.
it's not a surprise. But to briefly answer that, I would say all of them, all fandoms right now, are influenced by this because one of the major fandoms, Star Wars, was influenced by it, right? So
Hmm.
George Lucas really, and Christopher Vogler, who is a very well known screenwriter, and he came out with a whole book on how to coach screenwriters in the monomyth theory and Joseph Campbell's theory. So I don't think that it's a surprise that now most of the fandoms that we have are influenced by this. But particularly with my work, because I niche with queer people and younger queer people, particularly, 10 or 15 years ago, it was Avatar The Last Airbender. Now,
We're
or
great
like,
show, great.
amazing show,
Yeah.
right? Even like what five, I can't think when it went off, yeah, but 5 years ago it was Steven Universe. Steven Universe was
Yes.
one that was really impactful for me because I was starting to go on my gender journey around that point.
Yep.
And
Same. That was when I started to, I had just come out like with my sexuality and was like, I didn't even know non-binary people were a thing until right around the same time that Steven Universe that I discovered that show.
see,
So it was like right all around the same time. Yeah.
it's funny, isn't it? It's funny how if we were to really ask how many of our non-binary friends were influenced by that show, not it turned us non-binary, but it opened a doorway, allowed us to see possibility, right? I would suspect a lot of people. There's a reason why Steven Universe particularly is kind of the avatar of the last airbender of its generation, right?
Yeah.
Every so often a show comes along and it's so impactful because um it's so relatable. So for me, Steven Universe, first of all, Steven Universe started in a place where I was in my life. So I felt very connected to where Stephen was in season one. And as the story progressed and the diverse characters came, and you started to learn more about the backstories of the other gems, the more I started to relate to these feelings and these features. And I think in some way, the creators and where they were at also connected because Rebecca Sugar is also non-binary. So there's a lot of non-binary characters in it that are identifying themselves outside of the strict constructs that their homeworld society gave them and enforced and made them fit into. And so I think that's a very appealing thing. I've noticed that a lot of the people I used to LARP with have now come out as trans or non-binary or on gender journeys, and so it's interesting. It's very very interesting to see. But with Avatar: The Last Airbender, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, that idea of um, having a mission, right? Being not special, but having the responsibility of saving the whole world. And I think that really had a lot of relatability for the queer community in that moment, right? To have these special abilities that set us apart. Um,
Yeah, and you
and then
perfectly kind of have a character that everybody can attach onto, right?
totally.
In Avatar,
Mhm,
you've got those queer people that want to be the Aang, right? They want to be the chosen one type
mhm,
character. They have a journey that they're on. They're here to save the world. But then you have the Kataras who
mhm,
they're there to support those that are on the journey, and
yes.
they make it their mission, like you're saying, to save the world. And then the Sakas who they don't think they're that special, right? But they like find out that they are along the way. And then you, of course, there's so many queer people that identify with Zuko's story, uh, and his journey as a character, like a character who like just learns to love, right? And went on a journey from hate to love. And it's similar to Kylo Ren. I like there's a lot of lines that we could draw between Kylo and Zuko as
Oh,
characters.
totally.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And I'm pretty sure that Dave Filoni was connected or was friends with the people who created Avatar: The Last Airbender. So I
He
wouldn't be
was
surprised. Yeah.
in the writers room on Avatar. So he worked
That's
on
right.
Avatar. Yeah.
That's
So
right.
And he
That's right.
directed a lot, some of the later season episodes as well.
Makes sense. Okay,
Yeah,
that makes sense.
and
I'm so old. I'm trying to remember back into the midst of time now.
well, in a lot of the similar storytelling from Avatar, you
Yes.
can definitely see translated into Clone Wars and Bad Batch and the like the Mandoverse shows in Star
Absolutely.
Wars for sure. And so
Absolutely.
I have to ask, you're talking about Steven Universe, which gem do you kind of find identifying
Right.
with, or character in general with the show?
That's hard because I think several of gems really relate to where I find myself sometimes. Yeah. I really relate to Pearl
Hmm.
because of I've had loss in my life. I've experienced loss in my life, and I've experienced that need to always be perfect, right?
Hmm.
Um I've also experienced that needing to reconcile self. So I really connect with Stephen's later story, that idea of feeling like I'm a monster and I'm a horrible individual and all of that, and that nobody loves me. I went through a period where I actually thought my parents didn't love me for a long time, and
Hmm.
that was entirely my own thing. It was a lot. So, um, but I think I think the whole concept of the crystal gems as opposed to the homeworld gems is huge for me. I really relate to the idea of trying to find my own way in the world as opposed to trying to fit in. And I come from like British culture is absolutely ridiculous. It's got a strict like social structure, regardless of if you're like low class or high class, right? Like there are so many expectations. It's a very passive aggressive culture. They're
Hmm.
coming out of that now. They've really changed in the past 30 years. But like the British culture I grew up with is very, very, very structured and very, what would the neighbors think? Don't ever change. Don't change your hairstyle. Don't be weird. Don't be outside of the box. All this and all the other. And so when I came out as
Very similar
non-binary,
to, I suppose, the kind of like waspy middle class American culture.
yeah, very much so. Like, don't be different because being
Yeah.
different means that people can laugh at you, people can victimize you, people can,
Yep.
they'll single you out. So, what did I do when I finally came out as non binary? I went out and I bought myself a purple suit, literally, like, went to the thrift stores, bought like anything purple I could find, changed my hair purple. And because purple is the color I really identify with.
Yep. I've got purple hair right
I
now.
love it. I love it. I love it. I thought it was. I wasn't sure with the
With the lighting. Yeah.
love it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's something very powerful about like a visual transformation in
Yes.
storytelling, but also like as a person. Like when I first came out, like just as a gay, um, the it was earrings, right? I
Oh
went and got
yes.
my
Yeah.
ears pierced, and I had long hair, so I cut my hair really short for the first
Mm,
time. And then I've in the past years kind of when I've started being a lot more open about like my pronoun usage and like being non-binary. And so I was just I got married first because I didn't want the colorful hair during all the
right.
wedding pictures. And then afterward I was like, okay, it's time to do the crazy hair and just kind of have a visual signifier of like
Mm,
I'm here to be who I am and be different. And if
love it.
you're not gonna accept that, then like whatever. I'll
That's
my
your
time
problem,
is
not
better
ours.
spent
Yeah.
elsewhere. Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
and I guess we see that in a lot of characters too on their
Yes.
journeys. With like masks is talking about Star Wars,
Totally.
is huge with Vader and
Mhm.
Kylo. Um, and that with superheroes as well, their
Mhm.
suits change as they change. Uh,
Absolutely.
like Jean Grey from the
Jean
X-Men
Grey.
is kind of
Yes.
pops into my head as a character. Like you can track her journey as a character with her suits and her changes in
Totally can.
outfits.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, it's
Um,
a very physical transformation. Like look at and from Gundam Wing, Zex Marquis, right? Transformation from Zex Marquis into his original self, right? And his mask shatters, right? It's true. There's a lot that can be said about that visual element, and I think that that's very telling. Bringing us back to Steven Universe, that's very telling in that show because as characters change and they're going through whatever's happening inside, they outwardly change, right? And I think that that gives permission to not only not keep things inside, but to also experiment with who we are, experiment with showing who we are. And in that experimentation, and I think particularly for queer community, this is very important. In experimenting, we then develop an understanding of our boundaries. And in understanding boundaries, we're then able to feel secure in saying, I'm not accepting what you're telling me right now. I'm not accepting the constrictures that you're giving me right now. I get to decide how I live and who I live my life with.
Yeah, the Malachite came to mind
Like, yes.
immediately when we're talking about like consent and restrictions and boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
and this idea that a fusion that's non-consensual, like, or that isn't meant to happen, there's something off about it, and that it can't sustain, that it's an unstable
Absolutely.
bond. Um, and I think, like, I guess Stevani would be the other end of the
Mm-hmm.
spectrum. This idea of a fusion where they're comfortable
Mm-hmm.
fusing, but they would rather be Stephen and Connie
Absolutely. Absolutely.
as individuals. And I think fusing made them find themselves as individuals even more strong than before they had fused.
Very much so. That was a wonderful symbol of enmeshment. This idea in psychotherapy of enmeshment, when people whose boundaries are so weak that they literally enmesh with somebody else, right? And then where does one begin and where does the other person begin, right? You can't then understand your own needs. You can't understand the other person's needs. And it becomes very, very unhealthy very quickly, right?
Have you found that you have clients who identify more with a character like Garnet, who is a fusion, as opposed to seeing themselves as an individual who fuses with another individual?
I would say, well, it's hard to say with clients because they really come from across kind of the breadth of work. I will say that those people who have used Steven Universe as an example with, they tend to, like, if people are working in like a polyamorous situation, they're very
Mm-hmm.
interested in those fusions because they relate them to their own polycules. So the other example of a fusion in and there's like 7 or 8 gems all fused together. And I love that. And I
Yes.
think her
Oh,
name is
yeah.
Granny. I can't think what her name is now, but um,
Oh, yes. I Oh, the name is
you
skipping.
know who I'm talking about. Yeah,
Yes.
yes, yeah. So they're very curious about that, and they love that character. When it comes to Garnet, I think Garnet can be any relationship, right?
Yeah.
Garnet can, I think we can all find ourselves in Garnet. And in truth, I often think of Garnet as a relationship with myself, like my two sides or my multiple sides, and how
Yeah.
they fuse to become the person I am now. And so I often look. I will say that some of the people I've worked with, they're more interested in finding their own gemstones than necessarily relating to particular characters. So something
Hmm.
I love to do with some clients. When I had my office, I'm working just online now, but when I had my office, we had a big bowl of crystals, like the little pick and mix crystals, tumbled stones you can find at like fairs and places. And so I would get that out, and I would say select one that reminds you of who you are, and they
Hmm.
would rummage through and they would rummage through and they would find one, and we would talk about, like, what is it about this crystal, this rock, this stone that reminds you of yourself? What is it that's being reminded of? What do you get out of this? And we would have a whole session just on them exploring themselves in this way. And for at least two of them, I reflected that, well, this is your gem,
Hmm.
right?
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm sure, like, the visual symbolism there,
Mm-hmm.
and how we could, like, look into, like, we are talking about spirituality and like what crystals mean, and the
Absolutely.
poetic symbolism that they have, and being able to help a client with their own stuff that they're going through. I'm sure that can be really powerful,
Yeah.
as like an icon for their journey as a person.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I will also say, like, I don't just use Steven Universe as an example.
Yeah.
A lot of the younger people, they come like anime tends to be a very big one for a lot of the younger people. Young, when I say younger people, I'm saying like below, younger than 22.
Hmm.
Um, Older people, they tend to be like older in their 30s or even 40s. They're connected to, say, for example, I was working with one person the other week, and we talked about the Worst Witch. So a lot of the clients I tend to work with who are queer, they also tend to be interested in witchcraft and spirituality in that way. So we were talking about like Mildred Hubble, or like for me, Harry Potter. I
Yeah.
mean, I know your I know your listeners won't be able to see me, but like I physically look a bit like Daniel Radcliffe. I have the same glasses, I have a scar on my forehead, I have a British accent, right? So Harry Potter has been a thing that has constantly been in my life because people have said, "Oh, you look like Harry Potter." Finding that for me, then okay, well, if how do I relate to Harry Potter myself as opposed to
Mm,
I'm being told I'm Harry Potter? So that could be a whole other conversation, but
yeah. And I mean, going through school, having like teachers or professors that you do and don't connect with, and
mhm.
like there's something leaving the author out of it, right? And all of her nonsense.
Yes,
Uh,
yes,
there's something for everybody to kind of connect with that story too, in that I think could definitely be powerful. I'm sure also
absolutely.
asking like what color lightsaber would you have, right? If we're
This
talking
is the
Star
thing.
Wars, that could be like something similar as well.
Absolutely. There is a budding field of books now that people can go and look into, personal mythology, personal fan fiction writing. There's a one book in particular I love, and it's by some psychologists down in California, and it's called Starship Therapies. And the
Hmm.
whole book is about using fan fiction as self help therapy. And I thought that was really cool. And I mean, it's something I've been doing for a long time, anyways. There's also a whole conference on how to use gaming and role playing gaming, and fandom and geekdom, in a therapeutic way. There's also a psychologist down in New York who's put out a book called The New Psychology of Gaming, and it's all about the relationship between gaming as a space that people can enter and experience themselves through, as opposed to just an escape. So there's a lot of material coming out now, and I'm really pleased because I think the majority of us who are under 40, we live most of our lives online on a TV screen in some kind of virtual space, and so those are the spaces that we need to be exploring, and understanding. So.
That's really cool. Yeah, I know like sociologists have used like WoW to
Mhm.
study like social structures.
Totally.
Um, the just yeah, taking what we know about like the psyche and about like human behavior and
Mhm.
applying it to like what people are actually doing. It's
Yes,
how we're spending our free time. Uh,
absolutely.
is that's really cool. So you have published writing.
Mhm.
Are you're do you have for my listeners if they wanted to go hear from you? Are
Mhm.
you published nonfiction, fiction? Where can they find your work? Is it online, in the bookstore? Where would they be able to find your stuff?
Of course. So the best place to go is my website, benstimpson.com. The book that I have coming out in September is an exploration and a guide to ancestor veneration as a spiritual practice. So I wrote that. It's coming out through Llewellyn Worldwide. And in that, I talk about how individuals can use like fictional characters, conceptualizing them as ancestors, especially for those of us in the queer community where familial connections are often broken down. We don't have a really strong connection with our ancestors. And so looking at affinity ancestors. And when I say ancestor veneration, I'm talking about as a spiritual practice relating to ancestors. And in some ways, it's very similar as when we're relating to superheroes or gods or mythical figures or whatnot. It's similar sort of relationship. So that is available on in September. You can find out more about that on my website. I also have a podcast that I do, talking to various spiritual practitioners. Essence podcast that can also be found on my website too.
Awesome. And do you have any? So, what fandom or show or movie or book series or comic book is really grabbing your attention right now that people maybe haven't heard of that you want to kind of shout out for people to maybe go discover?
Yeah, for sure. Something that I'm really, really excited about is Upload, which is an Amazon series, and it explores basically the whole premise is a person, a guy, about 20 years from now, 10 years from now, is killed, and his mind is uploaded to the cloud, which is now a virtual heaven, and he's able to interact with people in the living, and they're trying to figure out who killed him. So it asks some
Huh.
really interesting questions, and I like it because well, the guy in this is really cute, so I'm really
It's
into that.
Robbie Amell, right?
Robbie ML, exactly. Yeah,
Yes.
so I'm really, really curious. I really love that. Apart from that, I'm really excited about all the Star Trek new series of Star Treks that have come out. I have to get Picard. There's last season Picard updated with, but yeah, Star Trek. I'm really interested.
Awesome. Yeah. So it sounds like Upload is kind of like an extended version almost of like the San Junipero episode
Mhm.
of Black Mirror.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yes, very
Cool.
similar. Yeah.
Well, yeah, listeners, go check out Upload on Amazon. Check out Ben Stimpson's website, his podcast, his books that he has coming out. Thank you for talking to me today.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Ben Stimpson. If you're interested in finding more about what they do, you can go to their website, benstimpson.com. The link to that is in the description of the episode. And you can see more about their books, their practice, and what they're doing online. Well, I hope that you enjoyed this episode. Thank you for joining Ben and I today as we discussed fandom and psychology. If you are listening and enjoying the podcast, please give it a review on your podcasting platform of choice. Also, if you have a friend who would like the podcast, make sure to share it with them to help grow our little community here. Once again, I am Miller C. Lashbrook, and you can find me on Twitter at Mill C. Lashbrook, on Instagram at Miller C. Lashbrook. And for more Pop Culture Fae, you can head to my website, popculturefae.com, for blog posts and more content. Lastly, I hope that you have a fantastic day, and I hope to find you the next time you wander into the forest of Pop Culture Fae.